The philosopher king-a-man kneels alone in a leather tent on the edge of a frozen river, somewhere on the northern frontier of the known world. Outside, an empire is bleeding. A plague no one understands is killing faster than any army ever could. Enemies are pouring across the Danube. His own body is failing him. Weak lungs, chronic pain, sleepless nights. He is, by any measure, the most powerful human being alive. He commands the largest, wealthiest empire on earth. He could have anything. He could destroy anyone. He could spend the rest of his life in marble palaces, surrounded by wine, gold, and flattery. Instead, by candlelight, exhausted, he picks up a pen and writes a single sentence meant for no one but himself. You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. He was not writing a book. He did not know these words would survive him by nearly 2,000 years. He did not know that emperors, generals, presidents, and everyday men chasing meaning in a broken world would one day read his private notebook like scripture. His name was Marcus Aurelius. He was the last of Rome's 5 good emperors, ruler of roughly 70 million people, commander of the most feared military machine in history. And yet, underneath the armor, he considered himself first and foremost a student of virtue, a student of death, a student of how to remain a good man in a world designed to corrupt him. This is the story of how a sickly, anxious boy from a provincial Roman family became the most powerful philosopher who ever lived, and why 2,000 years later, in boardrooms, gyms, therapy offices, and quiet 4 a.m. moments of doubt, his private journal is still teaching men how to survive too. Early life and childhood Rome, April 26, 121 AD. The empire is at its absolute peak. Trajan has just finished expanding its borders further than they will ever reach again. Hadrian, the new emperor, is consolidating a realm that stretches from the fog of Britain to the deserts of Mesopotamia. Into this world of unmatched power and unmatched excess, a boy is born in a house on the Caelian Hill in Rome. His name at birth is Marcus Annius Verus. Nobody in that room could have imagined that this child would one day rule everything they could see from the top of that hill, and everything beyond it, for thousands of miles in every direction. But greatness rarely begins with comfort. It begins more often with loss. When Marcus was around 3 years old, his father died. We don't know the details. Roman records are frustratingly thin on the emotional lives of children, but we know the effect. Marcus later wrote that he learned modesty and manliness from what he remembered of his father, and from his father's reputation after death, since the memory itself was so faint. Imagine that. One of history's most disciplined minds was partly shaped by a man he could barely remember, a shadow of a father built more from stories than from actual moments. This is where the story could have gone one of 2 ways. A fatherless boy in a status-obsessed aristocracy could easily have become entitled, hollow, desperate for approval. Instead, something remarkable happened. The people who stepped in to raise him didn't spoil him. They disciplined him, and that decision would end up shaping the entire trajectory of the Roman Empire. Part 3. Family. To understand Marcus, you have to understand where his family came from, because it explains almost everything about his temperament. The Anni Veri were not old Roman nobility in the romantic sense. They were, in fact, provincial. Marcus's family originated from a small town called Eucubi, in the region of Baetica, modern-day southern Spain. They had made their fortune, generations earlier, in olive oil production and trade, and had slowly, patiently, climbed the Roman social ladder through service, marriage, and reputation rather than ancient bloodline. This mattered. Families that clawed their way into power tend to guard their reputation obsessively, and the Anni Veri were known across Rome for exactly that. Seriousness, dignity, restraint. Not flash, not a spectacle, substance. When Marcus's father died, his grandfather, also named Marcus Annius Verus, took over much of his upbringing alongside his mother, Domitia Lucilla, a woman of considerable wealth in her own right, owner of a major brick and tile manufacturing business, one of the most lucrative industries in a city that was constantly rebuilding itself. Marcus later wrote with real tenderness about his mother, crediting her with teaching him piety, generosity, and to abstain not only from evil deeds, but even from evil thoughts. And beyond that, a simple way of living, far removed from the habits of the rich. In a city where wealthy Roman households were often theaters of excess, Domitia Lucilla apparently ran a home of quiet discipline. But the person who would change Marcus's life most wasn't in his immediate family at all. It was the most powerful man in the world. And he was watching a child grow up 2 doors down point 4. Education and formative years. The Emperor Hadrian had a nickname for young Marcus, Verissimus, roughly the most truthful one. Even as a boy, Marcus had a reputation for blunt, uncomfortable honesty in a city built on political theater. Hadrian, notoriously difficult to impress, noticed him. That single detail, a ruler noticing a child's character rather than his family's wealth, would eventually reroute the entire succession of the Roman Empire. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. What actually built Marcus's mind was his education, and it was extraordinary, even by elite Roman standards. He studied under a rotating cast of the empire's finest teachers. There was Diognetus, a painter and philosophy tutor, who is credited with introducing the teenage Marcus to philosophy itself. Under his influence, something almost comedic and deeply telling happened. Marcus became so enthusiastic about philosophical simplicity that he started sleeping on the floor on a plank bed, wrapped only in an animal skin, dressing like a Greek philosopher instead of a Roman aristocrat. His mother reportedly had to talk him out of it, not because she disagreed with discipline, but because a boy of his rank sleeping on bare boards was, practically speaking, a health risk waiting to happen. Think about that image for a second. Long before he ever held political power, this future emperor, heir to unimaginable wealth, was voluntarily choosing discomfort, not because anyone forced him to, because something in him already understood that comfort makes people weak, and he wanted to be strong. Then there was Junius Rusticus, arguably the single most influential figure in Marcus's intellectual life. Rusticus introduced him to the writings of Epictetus, a former slave turned Stoic philosopher, through a set of private lecture notes called the Discourses. Marcus would later describe borrowing Rusticus's own copy because he didn't own one himself. This detail matters more than it seems. The philosophy that would define an empire's most powerful man was passed to him almost like contraband, hand to hand, borrowed, precious. He also studied rhetoric intensively under Marcus Cornelius Fronto, one of the most celebrated orators of the era. Their surviving letters reveal a genuinely warm, almost father-son relationship, full of humor, affection, and long philosophical debates conducted through letters, the ancient equivalent of a group chat between mentor and student. But somewhere in his late teens, Marcus made a decision that revealed exactly who he was becoming. He essentially chose philosophy over rhetoric. Fronto, heartbroken, wrote to him lamenting that he had lost his star pupil to that austere and unadorned philosophy. Marcus gently but firmly told his old teacher that pursuing truth mattered more to him than pursuing eloquence. At 17 years old, in 138 AD, everything changed. 5. Struggles and failures. Here's something most people get wrong about Marcus Aurelius. They imagine a serene, untouchable sage gliding through life. The truth is far messier and far more human. Marcus suffered from chronic illness for most of his adult life. Ancient sources and his own writings describe recurring chest and stomach pains, likely some form of ulcer condition, possibly aggravated by stress and the crushing weight of decades of continuous warfare. He reportedly relied on medicinal treatments, some historians believe, including opium-based remedies, just to sleep and function through pain. This was not a man operating from a place of physical ease. He built one of history's most disciplined minds inside a body that was frequently betraying him. Then there was the plague. Beginning around 165 AD, what's now believed to have been smallpox tore through the Roman world in what historians call the Antonine Plague, likely brought back by soldiers returning from campaigns in the East. It killed an almost incomprehensible number of people. Estimates range from 5 million to over 10 million deaths across the empire over roughly 2 decades. Entire legions were gutted. The philosopher emperor spent years of his reign essentially trying to hold a civilization together, while an invisible enemy killed faster than any invading army. And war. So much war. Marcus inherited an empire that many assumed would coast on the peace and prosperity of his predecessor's reign. Instead, almost immediately, the Parthian Empire invaded Roman territory in the east. Then, while Rome was still recovering, Germanic tribes, the Marcomanni, the Quadi, and others, launched a massive, coordinated invasion across the Danube frontier, something the empire hadn't seriously faced in generations. Marcus, a man trained in philosophy, not warfare, was forced to spend nearly the entire second half of his reign personally commanding legions on freezing frontiers, far from home, fighting wars he never wanted. And perhaps his deepest personal grief, of the roughly 13 children he and his wife Faustina had together, only a handful survived into adulthood. Losing children was tragically common in the ancient world, but common did not mean easy. Marcus buried son after son, year after year, while simultaneously running an empire and commanding armies. This is the part that the marble statues never show you. The calm, composed philosopher king was, underneath it all, a grieving father, a sick man, and a reluctant general, forced by fate into almost every role he never asked for. So how did he not break? 6 major turning points there were 3 moments that fundamentally rewired the direction of Marcus's life. The first, Hadrian's decision. In 138 AD, the Emperor Hadrian, dying and searching for a stable succession plan, adopted a senator named Antoninus Pius on one condition. Antoninus had to, in turn, adopt 2 young men as his own heirs, Marcus, then just 17, and a boy named Lucius at Verus. Overnight, a provincial family's grandson became the presumptive future ruler of the known world. Marcus reportedly reacted not with excitement, but with dread. Ancient sources say he was deeply reluctant to leave his mother's house and move into the imperial palace. The second turning point, the death of Antoninus Pius in 161 AD, after a remarkably stable and prosperous 23-year reign. Marcus, now 40 years old, became emperor, and in an unprecedented move for Rome, he immediately insisted that Lucius Verus, his adoptive brother, rule alongside him as co-emperor, genuinely sharing power rather than eliminating a rival, which was practically a novel concept in the blood-soaked history of Roman succession. The third and most defining, the moment the wars began. Almost the instant Marcus took the throne, Parthia invaded in the east, and shortly after, the Germanic tribes broke across the Danube. The peaceful, contemplative reign Marcus may have envisioned for himself, reading philosophy, administering justice, Refining law evaporated almost immediately. Instead, he would spend roughly the final 14 years of his life largely on military campaign, commanding armies on the frontier, far from the comforts and philosophical circles of Rome. It's in this exile of duty, cold tents, bloody frontiers, endless grief, that Marcus began writing what would become his most enduring legacy. Point 7. Carer Journey Marcus's rise wasn't a single leap. It was a long, deliberate apprenticeship in power. After his adoption in 138 AD, Antoninus Pius groomed him methodically for nearly 23 years. Marcus held the consulship multiple times, the highest elected office in Rome, years before actually becoming emperor. He was given real administrative responsibilities, sat in on Antoninus's judicial hearings, and was gradually exposed to the actual machinery of governing an empire, rather than simply being handed a crown. This is a critical, often overlooked detail. Marcus wasn't thrown into power unprepared. He trained for it under one of Rome's most competent and stable emperors for over 2 decades, arguably one of history's longest and most thorough leadership apprenticeships. When Antoninus Pius died in 161 AD, Marcus became emperor at 40 years old, relatively mature by ancient standards, seasoned and philosophically formed. He immediately made Lucius Verus co-emperor, a decision that, again, was almost unheard of in Roman history, where shared power usually ended in assassination, not cooperation. For the next 19 years, Marcus's career was less about governing in the traditional Roman sense. Palace politics, gladiatorial games, public spectacle, and more about crisis management on a civilizational scale, fighting the Parthians, then almost immediately pivoting to the Marcomannic Wars against Germanic tribes along the Danube, all while the Antonine Plague ravaged the population and the treasury. He didn't rule from a golden throne in Rome. For years at a time, his office was a military tent on the frontier. That alone tells you something about the kind of ruler he was. Point 8. Important achievements despite ruling through what may have been one of the most disaster-filled periods in Roman imperial history, Marcus's list of accomplishments is genuinely staggering. He successfully defended the empire's borders against 2 simultaneous major wars, one in the east against Parthia, one in the north against a coalition of Germanic tribes, while managing a pandemic that may have killed close to 1/10 of the empire's population. He reformed aspects of Roman law to be more humane, particularly expanding protections for slaves, orphans, and minors, and improving the legal standing of widows. He didn't abolish slavery, no Roman emperor did, but he consistently pushed Roman jurisprudence toward greater fairness within the norms of his era. He stabilized Rome's currency and finances during a period of catastrophic strain, at one point reportedly auctioning off palace treasures, jewelry, silk robes, even golden statues, to fund the war effort rather than raising oppressive taxes on an already plague-ravaged population. Picture that, an emperor selling his own family's luxury items rather than squeezing more from his people. He maintained the co-emperorship with Lucius Verus without the civil war or assassination that Roman history would have predicted. And after Verus's death in 169 AD, likely from the plague, Marcus continued ruling alone with remarkable stability. And almost as an afterthought to him personally, he wrote a private philosophical journal during military campaigns that would go on to become one of the most printed, translated, and quoted books in human history, a text still assigned in universities, quoted in locker rooms, and highlighted in the notebooks of entrepreneurs 2,000 years later. He never intended any of that. He was simply trying to become a better man. 9. Philosophy And beliefs to understand Marcus, you need to understand Stoicism, not as academics understand it, but as he actually lived it, under real pressure. Stoicism, as a philosophy, is built on a handful of core ideas, and Marcus embodied them more thoroughly than almost anyone in history. First, the dichotomy of control. Some things are within your power, your judgments, your actions, your responses. Everything else, other people's opinions, the weather, illness, even death, is not. Suffering, the Stoics argued, comes not from events themselves, but from our judgments about them. Marcus repeated versions of this idea to himself constantly, almost like a mantra, because he needed it constantly, commanding wars he didn't choose, burying children he couldn't save, ruling through a plague he couldn't cure. Second, virtue as the only true good. Wealth, fame, power, even health. The Stoics classified these as indifferents. Nice to have, perhaps, but irrelevant to your actual worth as a human being. What mattered was character, wisdom, courage, justice, and self-discipline. Marcus, sitting on more wealth and power than almost any human in history up to that point, genuinely seemed to believe that none of it made him a better man. Only his choices could do that. Third, memento mori, remember you will die. Far from being morbid, this was, for Marcus, clarifying. If you might die today, what's actually worth your time? What grudges are worth holding? What distractions are worth chasing? He wrote to himself constantly about mortality, not out of fear, but as a tool to strip away trivial concerns and focus on what actually mattered. Fourth, the idea of viewing life from a cosmic perspective, sometimes called the view from above. Marcus would mentally zoom out, imagining himself as a tiny speck in an almost infinite universe, watching empires, cities, and individual human dramas rise and dissolve like waves. From that vantage point, a political insult, a bad day, even a war, could shrink down to a size he could actually handle. And finally, the idea that obstacles themselves can become fuel. In one of his most famous surviving lines, paraphrased across centuries of translation, he reminds himself that whatever blocks the path can, with the right mindset, become the path itself, that the mind can turn any obstacle into material for action. This wasn't abstract philosophy for Marcus. This was survival software, running constantly in the background of a man under siege from war, disease, grief, and exhaustion. 10. Daily routines and habits. What did an actual day look like for the most powerful man on earth? By multiple ancient accounts, Marcus woke early, often reluctantly. In one of the more famous and relatable passages of his private journal, he essentially scolds himself for wanting to stay in bed, reminding himself that he was born to work, to move, to fulfill his role like every other functioning part of nature. Bees, ants, spiders, all doing what they exist to do, while he lay there resisting the day. Sound familiar? Nearly 2,000 years before modern productivity culture, one of history's greatest leaders was already having the exact same internal argument with himself every single morning before engaging with the chaos of the world. Petty court politics, backstabbing, ingratitude, and difficult people. Marcus mentally rehearsed it in advance. He reminded himself, before even leaving his tent or his chambers, that he would inevitably encounter meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, and antisocial people that day, and that getting angry at them for being exactly what human flaws make people would be like getting angry at a hand for grasping or eyes for blinking. It's simply what imperfect humans do. This mental preloading let him absorb frustration without being derailed by it. He practiced philosophy, not as scheduled leisure time, but as an ongoing internal audit, journaling privately, likely in the evenings or during quiet moments on campaign, reviewing his own conduct, his failures, his irritations, and recommitting to his principles. This journal is, quite literally, the meditations we read today. Never meant for publication, never polished for an audience, just a working leader talking honestly to himself. He deliberately limited luxury, even while having unlimited access to it. Ancient sources describe him living with notable simplicity for an emperor. Modest meals, minimal indulgence, disciplined habits, a continuation of that teenage instinct to sleep on hard boards, matured into an adult philosophy of restraint. And critically, he built in constant reflection on mortality and impermanence, not as a one-time realization, but as a daily practiced habit, a recurring mental check-in designed to keep his priorities honest 11. Productivity Systemus Marcus didn't have to-do list apps or calendar software, but if you strip his practices down to their functional core, they map almost perfectly onto what modern high performers call systems. His core system was reflective journaling, what we'd now call an evening or ongoing review. He processed his day, his failures, his emotional reactions, and his intentions in writing, consistently over years. This wasn't diary keeping for nostalgia. It was closer to a performance review he ran on himself, brutally honest, with no audience to impress. He used pre-mortem style mental rehearsal, imagining difficulties before they happened so they wouldn't catch him off guard, anticipating annoying colleagues, betrayal, frustration, or bad news in advance meant that when those things actually happened, he'd already emotionally metabolized them once. He practiced radical prioritization through a brutally simple filter. Is this within my control or not? If not, he trained himself to release mental energy spent on it immediately. This function alone likely saved him enormous cognitive and emotional bandwidth, while simultaneously running a war and an empire. He deliberately narrowed his focus to the present task. One of his recurring pieces of self-advice was to do the task directly in front of him with real, precise attention, as if it might be his very last act, rather than let his mind scatter across 1,000 imagined future problems. And he treated obstacles as data rather than as personal attacks, reframing setbacks not as reasons to spiral emotionally, but as raw material to work with. A habit strikingly similar to what modern psychologists call cognitive reframing, and what modern entrepreneurs might call treating failure as feedback. Strip away the togas and the Latin, and what you have is a man running something very close to a modern high-performance mental operating system, under infinitely higher stakes than a quarterly earnings call, 12-12. Leadership style Marcus's leadership style was, for ancient Rome, almost radically restrained. He shared power. The decision to make Lucius Verus co-emperor in 161 AD, rather than eliminating a rival claimant, a shockingly common practice among Roman elites, reveals a leader more interested in stability and duty than in personal glory. He led from the front, literally. During the Marcomannic Wars, Marcus spent years personally present on the northern frontier, not micromanaging from the safety and luxury of Rome. This mattered enormously to Roman soldiers, who respected commanders willing to share their hardship. He governed through consultation rather than pure decree. Sources describe Marcus regularly consulting his council of advisors on judicial and administrative matters, taking his role as chief judge of the empire's highest court seriously, sometimes spending extraordinarily long hours personally hearing legal cases rather than delegating them away. He was famously accessible for a man of his rank, reportedly willing to let sessions run long into the night to ensure fair hearings, rather than rushing justice for his own convenience. And he practiced what might be the rarest leadership trait of all, in an absolute monarch. Self-restraint with unlimited power. He had, quite literally, the authority to do almost anything to almost anyone. Ancient and modern historians alike have noted the striking absence of the tyranny, paranoia, and brutality that characterized so many Roman emperors before and after him. Power did not appear to corrupt him, largely because he seemed to spend every single day actively working to prevent that corruption from taking hold. Point 13. Strategic and administrative. Protwell Marcus wasn't a businessman in the modern sense. His approach to managing the Roman Empire's resources during crisis offers strikingly relevant lessons for anyone running an organization under pressure today. Facing catastrophic war costs and a plague-shattered economy, Marcus resisted the easy, short-term move of simply crushing the population with new taxes. Instead, in a decision still referenced by historians today, he auctioned off imperial luxuries, palace furnishings, jewelry, ceremonial items, essentially liquidating personal and institutional assets rather than extracting more from people who were already suffering. It's the ancient equivalent of a CEO taking a pay cut and selling company perks before laying off employees. He prioritized long-term institutional stability over short-term political convenience. The decision to methodically train, test, and gradually elevate potential successors, a system inherited from Hadrian and Antoninus Pius, reflects an almost startlingly modern understanding of succession planning, something many modern organizations still struggle to execute well. He decentralized authority during active warfare, delegating significant command responsibility to trusted generals while maintaining overall strategic direction, recognizing, correctly, that he couldn't personally micromanage a two-front, empire-spanning conflict alone. And he consistently treated resource allocation as a moral question, not merely a financial one. Repeatedly weighing decisions not just by what would work, but by what a good, just ruler ought to do. That single lens, not what can I get away with, but what would a good man do, quietly ran underneath nearly every major decision of his reign. 14. Psychological profile. If you tried to build a modern psychological profile of Marcus Aurelius, using nothing but his own private journal, an unusual and deeply human picture emerges. He appears to have battled what we might now recognize as chronic anxiety and self-doubt, constantly reminding himself, sometimes almost pleadingly, to stay calm, to not overreact, to control his temper, to resist irritation. People at peace rarely need to write themselves the same reminders over and over across years. Marcus did. That repetition tells us something real. This discipline wasn't natural to him. He built it, deliberately, brick by brick, through relentless daily practice. He shows clear signs of what modern psychology would call high conscientiousness, an intense, almost compulsive commitment to duty, structure, and self-improvement, paired with a strong internal locus of control, meaning he consistently focused on what he personally could influence rather than externalizing blame onto circumstances or other people. There's also compelling evidence of emotional suppression as a coping strategy, not repression in the unhealthy sense, but a deliberate, philosophically grounded practice of processing emotion internally through writing rather than through outward reaction. Particularly useful for a man who literally could not afford to visibly panic in front of legions, or a terrified, plague-ravaged populace. And underneath all of it, there's a persistent, almost melancholic awareness of mortality and impermanence, not depressive in tone, but genuinely, functionally used as a psychological tool to maintain perspective and reduce the emotional weight of daily frustrations. In short, Marcus wasn't a naturally serene man handed an easy temperament. He was, by his own private admission, a worried, self-critical, occasionally frustrated human being who built one of history's most disciplined minds through relentless, unglamorous daily repair work on himself. Relationships and personal life of Marcus married Annia Galeria Faustina, known as Faustina the Younger, the daughter of his adoptive father, Antoninus Pius, in 145 AD. Their marriage lasted roughly 3 decades, until Faustina's death in 175 AD. For centuries, some later Roman sources circulated rumors and gossip about Faustina's fidelity, but many modern historians treat much of this as unreliable political character assassination, common in ancient sources describing powerful women. What's better documented is that Marcus, in his own writings, spoke of her with genuine affection and gratitude, describing her as obedient, affectionate, and without artifice. And after her death, he had her deified by the Senate and founded charitable programs in her memory, supporting orphaned girls across the empire. Whatever the full truth of their marriage, the public record shows a husband who mourned her seriously and permanently. Together, they had approximately 13 children, a staggering number even by ancient standards, of whom only a handful, reports suggest around 5 or 6, survived into adulthood. This is almost impossible for a modern audience to emotionally process. Repeated child loss, again and again, over decades, while simultaneously governing an empire in crisis. It's worth sitting with that for a moment before moving on. His friendships with mentors like Fronto and Rusticus, stretched across decades, and based on surviving letters, appear to have been genuinely warm, intellectually alive relationships rather than mere political formalities. And then there's his son, Commodus, a relationship that would eventually cast a long, complicated shadow over Marcus's entire Legacy 16. Biggest mistakes, and failures no honest telling of Marcus's story can avoid his single most consequential decision. One that historians still debate almost 2,000 years later. Marcus broke with roughly a century of precedent. Every emperor before him, going back to Nerva, had selected a successor through adoption, choosing the most capable candidate available rather than automatically handing power to a biological son. This adoptive succession system is widely credited by historians as a major reason the empire enjoyed such remarkable stability during the era of the so-called 5 good emperors. Marcus had a biological son who survived to adulthood, Commodus, and instead of continuing the adoptive tradition, Marcus named Commodus his heir and co-emperor. Commodus would go on to become one of the most widely criticized emperors in Roman history, a ruler many ancient historians describe as vain, erratic, and increasingly detached from the responsibilities of governing, more interested in gladiatorial spectacle than administration, and whose reign is frequently cited by historians, such as Edward Gibbon, as marking the symbolic beginning of Rome's long imperial decline. Was this Marcus's failure? Historians remain genuinely divided. Some argue Marcus simply had no real alternative, that removing a legitimate, surviving biological heir in favor of an outsider risked immediate civil war, especially with the empire already strained by decades of plague and warfare. Others argue that Marcus, the man who spent his entire life training himself to see clearly and choose virtue over convenience, may have let paternal love cloud the same clarity he demanded of himself in every other decision of his life. Whatever the true explanation, the outcome remains one of history's most quietly devastating ironies. The most self-aware, disciplined philosopher-ruler in Roman history appears to have made his single most consequential decision based on the one variable philosophy couldn't fully override, being a father. Point 7. Controversies and critique Marcus's reputation, while overwhelmingly positive across most of history, isn't without genuine controversy, and an honest documentary owes you the full picture. During his reign, sporadic but serious persecutions of Christians occurred across parts of the empire, including some notable and violent incidents. Historians continue to debate the degree of Marcus's direct personal involvement versus these events being largely driven by regional governors and existing Roman legal frameworks that already treated the new religion with suspicion. What's clear is that, unlike some later Christian emperors who actively protected the faith, Marcus did not intervene to stop these persecutions, and some later Christian writers criticized him for this, even while many others still respected his philosophical character. There's also the matter of near-constant warfare during his reign. While Marcus is remembered as a reluctant warrior philosopher, his armies still fought brutal, extended campaigns against Germanic tribes, and Roman military conduct in this era, as in most ancient warfare, included the kind of large-scale violence and subjugation that doesn't fit comfortably alongside his gentle philosophical image. And, of course, the succession decision covered in the previous section remains, in the eyes of many historians, his most damaging and debated legacy, a philosophical giant whose personal choice arguably helped set the empire on a path toward instability that would unfold over the following century. None of this erases what Marcus achieved, but it does complicate the marble statue version of him, and arguably makes him more useful as a real historical lesson than a flawless legend ever could be. 18. Most famous quotes. And lessons. Marcus never intended his private notebook to become a source of quotable wisdom, which is exactly why it feels so different from most philosophy. It doesn't sound like someone trying to sound wise. It sounds like someone trying, quietly and repeatedly, to become better. Among his most enduring ideas, the reminder that you have authority over your own mind, not over the events happening around you. And once you truly grasp that, you find real strength. There's his famous reframing of obstacles, the idea that whatever stands in the way of an action can, through the right mindset, actually become fuel for that same action, that the obstacle itself can become the way forward. There's his blunt, almost impatient challenge to stop merely discussing what a good person should be, and instead simply become one. Action over endless philosophical debate. There's his meditation on mortality, the reminder that you could leave this life at any moment, and that this awareness should shape what you do, say, and think right now rather than being pushed off into some imagined future. And there's perhaps his most quietly devastating line, a reflection on how little of life is actually spent living, when so much of it slips away in distraction, complaint, and delay. None of these ideas are complicated. That's the entire point. Marcus wasn't trying to impress anyone with complexity. He was trying to survive an impossible job with his character intact, and stripped every idea down to something simple enough to actually use under pressure. 990. Views on success, money, and happiness. Marcus held, quite literally, more wealth and power than almost any human being in recorded history up to that point. And his private writings reveal a man who consistently, deliberately refused to let any of it define his sense of worth. To Marcus, external things, money, status, public approval, even physical comfort, were philosophically classified as indifference. Not evil, not forbidden, but ultimately irrelevant to the actual measure of a life well lived. You could have all of it or none of it, and still be, underneath, a good or a bad person. The wealth itself proved nothing. True success in Marcus's framework was almost entirely internal, living in accordance with reason and virtue, fulfilling your role well, treating others justly, remaining disciplined regardless of circumstance. A poor farmer living with integrity was, by this measure, more successful than a wealthy senator living dishonestly. Happiness, similarly, wasn't something Marcus believed you chased through accumulation. It was a byproduct of virtuous action and right thinking, achievable, at least in principle, regardless of your external circumstances. Whether you were ruling an empire or dying of plague in a military tent, which, notably, is closer to how his own life actually ended. This wasn't naive idealism from someone who'd never experienced hardship. This was the operating philosophy of a man who had wealth beyond imagination and used almost none of it for personal indulgence, who had absolute power and consistently constrained his own use of it, and who, by every available account, seemed to genuinely believe that his own character, not his empire, was the real project of his life. Point 20. Lessons ordinary people can pap today. You don't need to run an empire for Marcus's lessons to be useful. Arguably, they're more useful now than ever, because most of us are fighting internal wars, not literal ones. First, focus only on what you actually control. Your effort, your attitude, your choices, yes. Other people's opinions, the economy, traffic, what your boss thinks of you, no. Redirecting your energy exclusively toward the first category is, according to nearly 2,000 years of Stoic practice and a growing body of modern psychological research, one of the single most effective tools for reducing chronic anxiety. Second, use adversity as material, not as an excuse. Every setback, a job loss, a rejection, a failure, carries some form of usable information or opportunity buried inside it, if you're willing to look for it instead of collapsing into self-pity. Third, build a genuine daily reflection practice. You don't need an emperor's education to journal honestly about your own conduct at the end of each day. This single habit, more than almost any other, is what transformed Marcus's private struggles into disciplined character over time. Fourth, remember your mortality, not to become morbid, but to become urgent and clear about what actually deserves your limited time and attention. Fifth, treat difficult people as weather, not as personal attacks. People will be inconsiderate, dishonest, or frustrating. Expecting otherwise is expecting humans to stop being human. Preparing for it in advance, as Marcus did every single morning, drains it of its power to derail you. And finally, separate your worth from your wealth. You can pursue ambition, money, and achievement. Marcus never rejected effort or duty, but your actual character, the person you're becoming through your daily choices, remains the only thing that was ever truly yours to control. 21. Legacy and impact on the world. Marcus Aurelius died in 180 AD, likely near Vindobona, modern-day Vienna, or Sirmium, while still on military campaign against the very Germanic tribes he'd been fighting for over a decade. He was 58 years old. Even in his final days, by most accounts, he remained composed, reportedly more concerned about the transition of power and the state of the empire than about his own suffering. His death is traditionally marked by historians as the symbolic end of the Pax Romana, the roughly 2-century stretch of relative peace and stability across the Roman world, and the beginning of a slower, more turbulent chapter in Roman history under his son Commodus. But Marcus's true legacy isn't really written in territorial maps or military campaigns. It's written in a small, private notebook that almost didn't survive at all. His personal journal, later titled Meditations by later editors, from the Greek phrase roughly meaning things addressed to himself, remained largely obscure for centuries before gradually being copied, translated, and rediscovered across the medieval and Renaissance worlds. Today, it's one of the most continuously printed philosophical texts in human history. It has influenced military leaders, business executives, therapists, and everyday people navigating grief, ambition, anxiety, and failure, not because it offers easy answers, but because it offers something rarer, brutal, private honesty from a man who had every excuse to lie to himself and mostly refused to. Modern Stoicism, cognitive behavioral therapies, philosophical roots, and an entire contemporary self-improvement movement can trace direct intellectual lineage back to the ideas Marcus was quietly rehearsing to himself, alone, in a tent, nearly 2,000 years ago. He never wrote those words for us. That somehow is exactly why they still work. 22. Closing cinematic conclusions. Strip away the empire. Strip away the armor, the legions, the marble busts, the 2,000 years of history stacked on top of his name. What you're left with is a man who was afraid, who was grieving, who was in physical pain, who inherited a job he never fully wanted, and who, every single day, chose to sit down and try to become slightly better than he was the day before. He didn't have a formula for a perfect life. He had a plague he couldn't cure, wars he didn't choose, children he couldn't save, and a body that was constantly failing him. What he had, instead, was a practice, small, repeated, unglamorous, of confronting his own mind honestly, over and over for decades, until discipline became identity. Marcus Aurelius never set out to write one of history's most influential books. He was simply trying to survive being human, with some measure of integrity, under the heaviest possible weight the world could put on one man's shoulders. Maybe that's the real lesson underneath everything else. You don't have to feel calm to become disciplined. You don't have to feel strong to keep showing up. You just have to be willing to sit down again and again and have an honest conversation with yourself about who you're becoming. Somewhere on a frozen frontier, nearly 2,000 years ago, an emperor who ruled the known world quietly reminded himself of something every one of us still needs to hear. You don't control what happens to you. You only control who you choose to become in response. That was true then. It's still true now.